Chapter 3. The Bonavoce Years. I was fascinated by Ernesto Bonavoce from the first moment I saw him. His hair was dark and slightly wavy. Although not fat, he could fairly be described as, well, plump, and like many men of the more corpulent build, he was very soft and gentle underneath. Oh, he had beautiful teeth, which gave him a very wide smile. They protruded slightly from his upper jaw, which helped his singing, but his most striking feature were his eyes. They were the colours of ripe hazels, and had an irresistible sparkle that captured everyone he met. Voce, as I used to refer to him, was always very particular about his appearance. Right from his beautifully polished shoes to his immaculate fingernails, there was evidence of careful attention to detail and elegant refinement. His cuffs were always half an inch below his well-tailored suits, and there were 4 buttons on the sleeve of his jacket, which actually buttoned and unbuttoned instead of just being sewn on. It was his voice, though, that had won him widespread fame, and even in his everyday conversation, its unique music and power of expression was instantly detectable. The great secret of his voice was that he opened his mouth to sing. The only person since who I ever really heard sing in any similar way was Luciano Pavarotti. Oh, he was undoubtedly the world's greatest living tenor. Of course, Pavarotti was much bigger than Voce. I always remember the first instruction that Voce ever gave me. He said, "Hilda, don't be afraid to open your mouth and sing. Don't worry about the shape of your mouth. It will form its own. Just remember 2 things when you go out there. The people at the back have paid their money. The people at the front have paid their money. So entertain the people at the back as well, because they all want to hear you. Go out and open your mouth wide and never be afraid to show your teeth." Unlike many of the great maestros, however, he had not established himself in one of the great European opera centres, but had chosen instead to create his school in the lovely northern Italian town of Vicenza. He had bought a large 18th century house in a quiet street near the Palazzo Chiericati, which is one of Andrea Palladio's most famous buildings in the city. This served as both his own house and his school, though in actual fact the only part of it which his students really saw was the music room. This was a large high-ceilinged room with tall windows that overlooked the lawn and flower beds. Voce had 2 pianos in this room, a boudoir and a concert grand. The concert grand was used whenever we were singing the great roles like Aida and Tosca, but the boudoir was played to accompany any other pieces. His housekeeper, Maria, was a very friendly soul. She was middle-aged and had been widowed in the Abyssinian War a year before. She had 1 child, a girl called Giulietta, who was very sweet but rather, well, retarded. She always came to the house with her mother, and we would find her sitting on the stairs with her head in her hands whenever we came for our lessons. Oh, Voce was marvellous with her. He used to treat her like his own daughter. He would pick her up and carry her into the music room and ask, "Did you like that?" And the little girl would stare into his warm brown eyes and murmur something about the lovely lady singing. Oh, but my Italian was never good enough to translate what that she was saying. When I first arrived in Vicenza, I had some difficulty in finding anywhere to live, and in desperation I took a tiny room at the top of an old tumble-down house in the poorer quarter of the town. I'd intended moving from this garret as soon as I found somewhere else to stay, but after a few months I became very attached to it, and as the rent was considerably cheaper than in any other part of the town, I decided to stay there permanently. The house was owned by a man whom I only ever saw after dark. He was very hospitable, and used to let different girls use the rooms every night. Sometimes he would even let one sleep in the room for part of the evening, and then another when the first had gone. The curious thing about these girls was that they always had their brothers with them. Well, some of them looked old enough to be their fathers, but after what Mother had told me about Italian men, I was very pleased to see that these girls were chaperoned so carefully. Sometimes a girl would come to the house with an extra brother, well, at least that's what I assumed, because the landlord tried to persuade me to let one or two men sleep on my floor when I first arrived. Of course I explained to him that it was quite out of the question, and when he inquired why I had come to the house in the first place, I told him it was in order to practice my singing, which was not strictly true. He only came up a few times when I was singing, and after that he never bothered to come again. He must have realized where my talents and my interests lay. Or not that I was a prude in any way. I used to enjoy listening to these girls and their brothers having pillow fights late at night. They always sounded as though they were having such fun. It reminded me of the times when Gil and I played together as children. My little room was very sparse. There was an old wooden bed, a chair, a rickety table, and a rail behind the curtain where I hung my clothes. I bought a lampshade and curtains for the window to make it more cheerful, as well as a second-hand rug which I found in the market, and a pattern counterpane which I hoped would keep me warmer. There was a small oil stove heater that used to smoke rather a lot, but which was the only means of heating, and I used to make coffee on top of it before I went to bed. I used to lie there at night with the curtains open, looking over the rooftops of the old quarter of the town, bathed in moonlight. Oh, it was very romantic, and I felt terribly bohemian. It was so unlike anything I'd ever experienced before that I easily imagined myself in l'art bohème. It was also so cold sometimes that a good deal more than my tiny hand was frozen. I never told anyone at the school where I was living, or not because I was ashamed of it, but because I wanted that first experiment of living on my own to be quite separate from my music lessons. I enjoyed doing my washing at the hand pump in the courtyard, as they did, and I used to love walking through the markets to Voce's house every morning, because after only a week there were one or two stall-holders who recognized me and shouted "Buongiorno" to me as I passed. After a while most of them recognized me, and as my Italian improved, I would chat to them, which meant that my walk gradually took longer and longer. I used to go down to a cafe run by one of my closest friends, Massimo, every morning for a cappuccino and a roll before going to my first class. I usually ate my evening meal there too, so after a few months I became one of their regular customers. I spent a lot of my evenings in the cafe pretending to read or write letters, while really I was intrigued by what was going on around me. I was often the only woman in the cafe in the evenings, but the men knew I was English and studying with the highly respected Signor Bonavoce. They used to come in after their evening meal to drink with their friends and play cards. As my time wore on, they became gradually more engrossed in politics, but that did not interest me half as much as watching them enjoy themselves. Massimo and his wife Olivier grew to look upon me as one of their family, and their two children often referred to me as their elder sister. Massimo spoke a little English, but Olivia only gabbled away in Italian so fast I could never understand what she was saying. Not that this really mattered, because we always used to communicate quite easily with our hands, like a lot of Italian car drivers. I began my day, as I had always done, with deep breathing exercises in front of my open window. Not only was it good for my breath control, it was a wonderful way of relaxing, and where Herr Lumbecker had tried, Bonavoce succeeded in getting me to relax completely for the first time in my life. He used to insist that apart from doing breathing exercises, I should sit and stare out of the window for as long as it took, until I saw nothing. Then I had to count to 3 slowly and stir myself into action. We always started singing with scales, and some mornings, if I were really relaxed and had had an egg and sherry flip, I would sing a top B flat with no trouble at all, and even achieve an F-in alt sometimes. Now, not many singers can do an F-in alt. I've not done one for years. As with Herr Lumbecker, I was always eager to push ahead and start singing songs, but Voce used to say, "No, you must be patient, little chicken." And with him, well, I was patient. He really taught me the art of self-control. The days were never long, but they were always rigorous and demanding. Voce believed that it was far better to work really hard for short periods than to try to spin the lessons out. We used to take a long time over lunch, which was the perfect way of winding down after a tiring morning over the piano or up and down the scales. The afternoons were more interesting as far as I was concerned than the mornings, since it was then that we studied set pieces, although at all the time he was concentrating on gradually improving technique. Now today, a lot of schools teach their students very differently. They concentrate on technique, pure and simple. But we did not go in for excessive technique when I was young. We sang because we really lived every note of the music, every moment of the part, and every emotion of the character. I found his teaching so refreshingly inspiring and expressive that in later years, when he was no longer with me, I never wanted to change anything that he had taught me. Whenever we were approaching a part for the first time, he would tell me, "When you are going to sing, you're going to think of this part, so think first of the meaning behind it." He would put his hands on my shoulders to begin with and say, "Now, sing ah, and go up the scale, but don't raise the slightest part of your shoulders." And I used to sing the scales doing exactly what he said. Then we would put one hand on my diaphragm and say, "Now, control your breath. Remember your shoulders. Open wide. When you breathe, you will breathe here, but your shoulders will not go up, and your diaphragm will not move out." The first time he did this, I complained vehemently. "Signor," I began. But he cut in, saying, No, my name is Ernesto." "Well, Ernesto," I continued, "it's impossible to sing high notes without raising one's shoulders and moving one's diaphragm." He only smiled that wonderful smile of his and slowly shook his head. He knew he was right, and I soon discovered that he was right as well. One of the first roles I studied with him was Santuzza from Cavaliere Rusticana by Mascagni. This was not one of the high soprano roles, and a lot of sopranos start their careers with Santuzza's aria because they are fairly easy to manage. The more demanding roles such as Gioconda and Norma came later. As time went on and I began to make progress, however, he started to devote more and more time to my lessons. I had been there 18 months when he asked me to make a recording with him. Oh, this was a tremendous honour, and I was terribly worried that I might not live up to his expectations. But he was as kind and considerate as always, and boosted my confidence enormously. We were to record the love duet from Act 1 of La Bohème, and so for weeks beforehand I had studied Mimi's role, and we had rehearsed together countless times. However, I was still shaking like a leaf when we arrived at the recording studios. The recording room was very unnerving. It was like a tiny cell, draped with heavy velvet curtains to deaden the sound, and the floor was covered in a thick carpet for the same reason. We stood together in front of our microphone and sang our duet, appearing at the musicians next door, and the conductor frantically beating time without being able to hear a sound for them, since there were only 2 microphones. But Voce knew exactly when to come in. It was part of his gift. Although the recording was never made available to the public, I was given a copy by Ernesto, and it is certainly the best performance of Mimi that I have ever given. I still had that record at Stackton Trestle, although I did not play it for many years for a number of private reasons. I found it hidden in a drawer only very recently and played it to Dr. Hinge, who suggested that I should put it away again. As time went on, we naturally performed more frequently together, both on the stage and in concerts. But before that part of my career developed, one very important change took part in my life. Voce invited me to move into more comfortable rooms in his house. Well, to say that he invited me is something of a euphemism. He virtually dragged me out of my garret one Sunday morning in the summer of 1938. Although we were so preoccupied by our rehearsals, neither of us were able to ignore the mounting tension in the world outside. Ernesto became very concerned for the safety of his pupils, especially for me, as the only English pupil he had. He worried about me walking through a town on my own, although I kept assuring him I was perfectly safe. However, early one Sunday morning, there was a knock at my door, and I opened it to him standing in the doorway, wearing a large hat and a long scarf which I had never seen before. He hurried into the room and told me to pack my things. I was dumbfounded. "Don't just stand there like a statue," he ordered. "Hurry up and get out of this hovel." I thought this was rather offensive. In the 2 years I'd been living in the little room, I'd grown very attached to it. I liked meeting the girls and their brothers on the stairs, and I'd become very fond of the pigeons that used to nest in the roof above me. We used to sing to each other, and here was Ernesto, though, tearing down the little curtain and grabbing my clothes that were hanging behind it. He bundled them all into my old-school suitcase, grabbed my hat and prayer book, and said, "Come along, I'll never let you come back to this place again." I was hardly dressed. The buckles of my clerk's sandals were still undone, and I had not had time to brush my hair, but he grabbed my hand and pulled me down the stairs. The noise we made brought the man who owned the house out of the room on the ground floor. It was the first time I'd seen him venture out in the daytime. When he saw Ernesto, he laughed coarsely and shouted after us, "Quanta costa! Quanta costa!" Ernesto shouted something back, but I did not understand what he said fully. It was something to do with the rent, I think. Naturally, my life took on a very different form after that move. I used to go downstairs for my singing lessons instead of having to walk through the town, and we'd often spend part of the weekend rehearsing together, although he never intruded on my privacy and always stayed in his own wing of the house. He still taught his other pupils as well, though there were now fewer of them. Our rehearsals were in particular for the memorable production of Tosca that was destined for La Scala. We had spent months rehearsing what Ernesto hoped would be one of his most successful and polished productions. I was to play Tosca, and he was to be Cavaradossi. We opened in Padua before a highly distinguished audience, and we could tell from the applause at the end of the first act that the production was being well received. Tosca has the most dramatic ending. Tosca discovers that Cavaradossi has been shot, while she herself has killed Scarpia, the chief of police. His deputies are rushing to arrest her, and her only way out is to throw herself off the battlements. Well, before I went on for the last act, Ernesto came to me and said, "Remember, little chicken, when you are jumping from there, that you are really jumping into the water below." Of course, when I was perched on the battlements at the last moment, I looked down and saw only a couple of old mattresses. But Ernesto's words were still in my mind, and even when one of the stage hands threw some salt over me when I landed to remind me of the sea, I felt as if I really had thrown myself over the battlements. The performance was a great triumph for Ernesto, and the success of the first night confirmed that we would be appearing at La Scala later on in the middle of March. We continued the tour in many of the opera houses and theatres of northern Italy, to Venice, Ferrara, Modena, Bologna, Florenza, and Pisa. They all received us with open arms. More flowers and vegetables were thrown than I could ever remember before. From Pisa, Ernesto and I travelled to Milan in the morning by train, and we had gone to Savini's for a celebratory lunch. We were ecstatically happy at the prospect of performing in the most famous opera house in the world before one of the most discerning audiences. We had champagne and oysters at one of the tables outside. Oh, it was a lovely spring day, and the arcade was busy with happy, smiling people, when the newspaper boy appeared shouting the headlines that Czechoslovakia had been occupied that morning as we were en route. The news spread through the restaurant and the arcade like wildfire. People jumped up from their tables to buy a copy of the paper to find out the full details. But Ernesto just sat in his chair with a glass of champagne in his hand, silently staring into space. Some people began to cheer and sing as the news spread, but Ernesto called over the waiter and paid the bill. Then he motioned that we should go. We left half a bottle of Bollinger on the table as we walked away from the sounds of jubilation. Ernesto stopped a taxi and asked the driver to take us to the station. He didn't say a word while we were being driven there. Only as the driver came to a halt did he take my hand and whisper sadly, "I'm very afraid that this is the beginning of the end, chicken." After buying the tickets for Vicenza, Ernesto asked for a telegram form, and I saw him address it to the manager at La Scala, and date it 16th of March 1939, before he wrote the message, "Regret. Performance cancelled indefinitely. Stop. Indisposed. Stop. Bonavoce." On the train, Ernesto tried to explain that this invasion by Hitler was sure to lead to war, and that in spite of my disappointment, the cancellation of our concert was his only means of protesting. But it was a dangerous decision. In the weeks after we returned from Milan, neither of us went out very much. We stayed in the house working hard on the series of concerts that Ernesto had been invited to give during the next 12 months. After my great disappointment, he was anxious to interest me in another set of performances, and so we set about putting together a performance of our favourite arias and duets. Apart from a brief holiday in Venice in July, the only time that we really left the house was on the first Sunday in every month, when we used to visit friends of Ernesto's for lunch. One Sunday, however, Ernesto decided that we should go for a picnic, so he borrowed an old farm cart, and about a dozen of us set off to a lake a few miles away. When we arrived at the lake, the view and the setting made the discomfort of riding on the cart more than worthwhile. We laid out the picnic in a small clearing surrounded by tall Lombardy poplars, and while the food was being prepared, Ernesto came up to me with a funny-shaped brown parcel. He stood in front of me with his legs planted far apart, gave me the parcel and said, "Open it, chicken." Inside, I found a big straw hat tied with a long blue ribbon. "You'll need that in the sun," he said. "We've got to look after that lovely golden hair and the delicate English skin. Put it on." The hamper we had bought was filled with all kinds of delicious food. There was an enormous joint of ham, 4 chickens, enough salad to feed an army of rabbits, and masses of fresh fruit. Ernesto had brought champagne as a treat for me. "A toast for the lady who will be the toast of the opera houses of Europe," he proudly announced. However, the champagne was not drunk without mishap. While trying to cool it, Ernesto had placed the bottle in the water on the end of a piece of string. However, the knot had come undone in the gentle swaying movement of the water in the breeze, and when he went to fetch it, the bottle was bobbing off towards the middle of the lake. Throwing off his hat and scarf, he took off his shoes and socks, rolled up his trousers, and waded into the shallow water to the rescue. "We can't have a toast without champagne," he said laughingly, as he sat on the grass drying his feet afterwards. I don't think anybody had ever told him about this little piggy went to market. But whether it was that, or the sensation of having his toes tickled as I recited the jingle, he was laughing so much that he let off the champagne cork with a violent bang that terrified the 2 horses so much that they cantered away through the trees, and the champagne shot all over my dress. We did not really mind, though. The horses were found by a couple of the others, and my dress quickly dried out. On the journey back to town in the evening, Ernesto and I sat on the front of the cart, taking it in turns to hold the reins. A boy with a whistle played all the way to Vicenza, and we sang along with him whenever we felt like it, or in my case, whenever I knew the words. It was one of the happiest days of my life. Even Maria was waving to us when we drove in through the gates of the house, though when I found out why she was waving, my mood changed dramatically. On occasions when telegrams used to arrive at Bracket Towers for Mother, she used to hand them to Alice, saying, "Oh, Alice, open it. My fingers won't open it." However, Cork always seemed to be on hand just at the right moment with a paper knife and a few calming words as he slit open the yellow envelope and took out the folded paper inside. Mother used to stand riveted to the spot, staring at the floor, and with her right hand waving about would say, "Read it to me, Cork, read it and get it over with." The message nearly always read, "Arriving 3:30 train. Stop. Please meet me. Bracket Basing." That was in England, of course. In Italy, the drama was very different, as I saw when Maria rushed up to the cart, waving an envelope, and handed the telegram to me. I had to open it myself. Even Ernesto would not open it. So I could well understand Mother's feelings as I slit the envelope and read the message inside. Father had never minced matters, and certainly not when it came to vitally important messages like this one, which I've kept ever since. Sent from Bracket Basing, Kent. Date 3rd of September 1939. Time 4:15 p.m. Destination Miss Hilda Bracket, Casa Bonavoce, via Garibaldi, Vicenza, Italy. Message: war declared. Stop. Demand immediate return. Stop. Situation critical. Stop. Apply British Embassy, Rome, for assistance and safe passage. Stop. Father. I sat on the cart, stunned and silent. The magic of the afternoon had evaporated, and the stark reality of what was happening in the world faced us head-on. I did not keep a diary as a rule, but that night when I went to bed, I put a black cross beside 3rd of September 1939. My loyalties were very torn. I felt a strong duty to obey my father, but at the same time I owed a great loyalty to Ernesto, whom I promised to help with the concerts in the next few months. My choice of action was made clearer, though, when we found out the next morning that war had been declared between Britain and Germany. Italy, though Germany's ally, had not declared war on Britain, nor vice versa. So I decided to stay and finish the concerts. I sent off a telegram to Bracket Towers right away, and I explained I would write a letter to them immediately, which I did. Vicenza, Ufficio Postali Centrali, 4 Settembre, Bracket. Bracket Towers, Bracket Basing, Kent. Inglaterra. Situation still safe. Stop. Must fulfill contract. Stop. Writing immediately. Stop. Returning Christmas. Stop. Love to you all. Hilda. The concerts in the next 8 months were hugely successful. There were moments from all my favourite operas, Aida, Il Trovatore, La Gioconda, and of course Tosca. It was not always easy to sing, though, what we were actually feeling at the time, since all the performances were a mixture of opera and our own personal emotions. The night we sang from Tosca, I remember that Ernesto sang the wonderful aria from the final act, where Cavaradossi is seated at the table before Tosca makes her entrance. I don't think there was a dry eye in the house that night. He sang it so beautifully. We had many glowing notices in the Italian press, and many distinguished members of the audience came back after the concerts to offer their congratulations. However, the greatest surprise came when one evening, after a concert in Naples, a very smartly dressed man presented himself to Ernesto and told him that none other than Il Duce himself, Mussolini, had requested that we should sing at a reception that he was giving in a villa just outside Rome to celebrate his birthday on 29th of July, 8 weeks away. When the man had gone, Ernesto commented wryly, it was a sort of invitation one could hardly refuse. It was a difficult time for both of us. News reached me in the next few days of the evacuation from Dunkirk, which suddenly made me feel very isolated and alone. On 10th of June, when Italy officially declared war on Britain and France, Ernesto became increasingly worried for my safety. But as long as I was favoured by the patronage of Il Duce, I was safe. Nothing was spared to ensure that our recital should be a success. We went to the wardrobe department of La Scala, and they loaned me the most beautiful Tosca gown from Act 2 of Tosca. It was made from bottle green velvet, which has always been one of my favourite colours. On the evening of 27th of July, we were driven from our hotel in Rome to the country house where the reception was to be held. We approached the house up a long sweeping drive, and came to a halt at the top of a large stone staircase that curved up to the front door, like a pair of barley sugar pedestals. There were urns full of flowers lining the stairs, and at the top, on either side of the front door, stood 2 sentries, who clicked their heels and saluted us with raised arms as we went in through the doors. All the guests had already arrived, and we could hear the sound of their laughter and conversation as we were escorted to our rooms before the recital. I was feeling more nervous that night than I'd felt for a very long time, but Ernesto gave me a small glass of brandy, which helped. One of Mussolini's aides showed us the main salon through a little spy hole. "Look through here," he said. And when I did so, I saw rows of people dressed in full evening dress, with tiaras and decorations of every shape and colour. I think I caught sight of the back of Mussolini's head, and I fancied that I saw the German ambassador across the other side of the room. The man who had originally invited Ernesto to perform walked onto the stage, beautifully decorated with flowers, and announced the programme. While he was talking, the aide led us to the double doors at the back of the hall, and we made our entrance through the audience and up the steps onto the stage. The recital was an outstanding success right from the start. Our duets were applauded loud and long, and Ernesto in particular seemed to be a great favourite. During one of his loveliest solos, I sneaked a glance at the front row, and I think I saw a little tear in the corner of Mussolini's eye. His face did not show any emotion at all, but that telltale tear gave him away. He reminded me of Prince Orlovsky in the Fledermaus sitting there in his great leather boots. When the recital finished, we made our exit off the side of the stage. There was a bottle of champagne waiting for us, and we drank this willingly, partly from nerves and partly from tremendous excitement. After only a few moments, the aide came in to say that Mussolini wanted to come and congratulate me in person. "Il Duce wishes to meet the great diva," he said. I did not know what I should say. I looked at Ernesto, and he indicated that I should agree, so as I said I would be honoured to receive him, but I needed a few minutes to compose myself. Ernesto appeared to sigh with relief when the aide closed the door behind him as he went out. I was in an absolute flap, trying to get my hair right, trying to check my makeup, and trying to calm my nerves, all at the same time, and Ernesto looking at his watch nervously. Minutes later, there was a light tap on the door. I took a deep breath and said, "Entrate!" The door opened, and in walked Massimo from the cafe in Vicenza. He was holding a very white handkerchief in his hand, and there was a peculiar smell following him into the room. He came quickly towards me, gesturing that I should keep quiet. I thought he was going to kiss me. I still do not know exactly what he did do, but everything went black.